If you've been paying any attention to the news lately, or you're in a corporate setting, or really just observing, the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI is, well, it's absolutely polarized right now.
It really is.
Organizations either see it as a critical, a moral and business imperative, or
Or as something that needs to be completely dismantled. There's almost no middle ground.
the stakes just feel incredibly high.
And that polarization is crippling. When you dig into the sources, what you find is that the real issue isn't the principle.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everyone agrees fairness and opportunity are good things.
Of course.
The problem is a huge systemic failure in implementation. What started as this really rich, multidimensional idea, diversity of thought, socioeconomic background, real inclusion, has just been boiled down to one thing.
Demographic representation.
Exactly, a simple, measurable dimension.
So we've turned a complex organizational strategy into a box-ticking exercise.
And that's where all the friction's coming from.
That's why we're here today. Our mission for this deep dive is to really move past that political noise and look at the evidence, the strategy papers, the psychology research, to unpack a new, more objective framework. We want to get away from this divisive zero-sum idea and instead look at how organizations can create more value for everyone, how they can actually, grow the pie. We're going to unpack the three pillars of this new approach: potential, synergy, and inclusion, or PSI.
And what's so interesting here is that the sources we're drawing on come from two different, often separate worlds. Hard corporate strategy and organizational psychology.
You really need both, don't you?
You absolutely do. You need the business case, the why, but you also have to understand the human behavior, the culture, to actually make it work.
Okay, so let's start with a critique of where we are now. Because if we don't get why the old model is failing, the new one won't make sense. The sources call it the add diversity and stir method.
It's a perfect description. I mean, if you look at what companies actually measure and report on today, and this is based on recent data from groups like the CHRO Association, it is overwhelmingly about surface-level demographics.
Gender, race.
Right. Those are the metrics tied to executive bonuses. They're what investors ask to see.
And what's the problem with that narrow focus? What are the consequences?
Well, it creates three big fundamental problems. First, it just ignores the most valuable kinds of diversity, like different cognitive styles, life experiences, or even political views.
Okay.
Second, it falls for that add diversity and stir trap.
Yeah.
It assumes if you just put a diverse group of people in a room, something great will magically happen. It ignores how hard it is to actually coordinate different perspectives.
So you get all the friction of diversity without any of the benefit.
Precisely. And the third, and maybe the most critical problem, is that the E and the I, equity and inclusion, get left behind. They get reduced to these surface-level gestures.
Like an awareness campaign or adding pronouns to your email.
Exactly. Instead of the real hard work of changing the culture so that different views can actually be heard and can thrive.
And this metrics-first approach is what led to the business case really falling apart. For years, you couldn't open a magazine without seeing those big consulting firm studies, right? Especially McKinsey's.
Oh, absolutely. The ones claiming a strong link between demographic diversity and financial performance. It felt like a settled fact.
But then the academics took a closer look.
And that's where it all unraveled. When serious researchers tried to reproduce those findings, they couldn't.
Really?
Yeah. They found the results were incredibly sensitive to how you define the terms or slice the data. The correlation would just vanish, or even flip, depending on small methodological choices. The statistical link was it was flimsy.
So if the data is not robust, but companies start mandating representation anyway, what happens?
Well, the evidence says the results don't follow. The best example is probably the mandate in Norway back in 2003, which required corporate boards to be 40% female.
I remember that. It was seen as this landmark experiment.
It was. But rigorous academic studies on that quota found that it actually led to value destruction, not a boost in performance.
Wait, disruption? Why? How?
Because when you mandate a demographic target without regard to expertise, you risk lowering the average experience level of the group. The new directors, in many cases, just had less industry-specific knowledge. They were appointed to meet a number, and that diluted the board's overall effectiveness.
So it proves the point. Forcing representation without focusing on competence just doesn't work. It can backfire.
It can actively damage the organization.
And that failure to link metrics to merit has real-world consequences for people, too. This is where it gets personal.
It does enormous damage. First, you get resentment from colleagues who feel like promotions are happening for reasons other than skill. And second, Tragically, it stigmatizes the very people it's supposed to help.
They get labeled as the diversity hire.
Exactly. Even if they were, by far, the most qualified candidate, that label is just corrosive.
And the sources point to times where merit was explicitly pushed aside.
Oh, for sure. One survey of recruiters found that 20%, 1 in 5, had actually been given instructions to screen out white men for certain roles.
Wow.
When you have policies that directly contradict the idea of hiring the best person,
Yeah.
you erode trust, and you misallocate your most important resource,
Yeah.
talent.
Okay, that brings us to the PSI framework. We need a path forward that avoids all of this. This is where it gets really constructive, starting with that first pillar, potential. I find it fascinating that this starts by totally redefining merit.
It completely reframes it. Historically, meritocracy has been about looking backward at past achievements.
Hmm.
You know, the fancy degree, the perfect resume,
Great.
potentials, flips that around. It's about assessing an individual's capacity for future contribution. It asks, where is this person going? What can they grow into?
But hang on, if we stop relying on those hard metrics, SAT scores, resume lines, aren't we just opening the door for subjective gut feelings? Isn't that where bias creeps right back in?
That's the million-dollar question. And the framework is really clear on this. It's not about being subjective. It's about recognizing that past performance is an imperfect predictor of future value,
Yeah.
especially if someone has overcome major obstacles.
Like growing up in poverty or going to under-resourced schools.
Exactly. Those things might suppress their resume credentials today, but overcoming them build incredible resilience, creativity, and drive. And that is pure fuel for future growth. And organizations profit from the future, not the past.
So how does an organization actually do that? How do you measure capacity instead of just credentials?
It takes proactive effort. Yeah. One proven way is through target schools initiatives. And I don't just mean sending a brochure. It means actively going to state schools, to communities that are overlooked, and finding talent that might assume they don't have a shot.
You're correcting for an information gap.
Exactly. And you combine that with things that correct for bias in the evaluation itself. The classic example is the symphony orchestras.
Ah, the blind auditions.
Right. When they put up a screen so the judges couldn't see the gender of the musician, the number of women hired went up dramatically. The standard didn't change. It was still about playing beautifully. But the barrier of unconscious bias was removed.
So uphold the standard, remove the barrier.
That's the mantra. And once you hire for that potential, you have to actually develop it. The sources are very critical of what you might call damaging support.
What do you mean by that?
It's when, in the name of being supportive, you lower your standards. For example, giving a junior woman less critical, less rigorous feedback than her male peer. It feels nice, but it actually holds her back.
It prevents skill development.
It prevents her from realizing that potential. The goal has to be high standards plus high support, like a real tough apprenticeship model where people are stretched, but given the tools to succeed.
Okay, so that's potential. Let's move from the individual to the team. The second pillar is synergy.
Right. And synergy shifts the focus from optimizing the person to optimizing the team. And the key distinction here, which is fascinating, is between demographics and how people actually think.
This is where the old DEI model really got it wrong, wasn't it? It just assumed demographic diversity would create better ideas.
It did. And the research is so clear on this. We need to prioritize cognitive diversity. That's the variation in thinking styles, professional backgrounds, training, expertise over just simple demographic diversity. The data shows it correlates much more strongly with team performance.
Can you give us a concrete example of that contrast?
Sure. Imagine an all-male team with an engineer, an economist, and a psychologist. That team has huge cognitive diversity.
Different ways of seeing the world.
Totally. Now imagine a demographically diverse team where every single person went to the same 2 Ivy League schools, studied finance, and worked at the same investment bank. They might look diverse, but they could suffer from massive groupthink because they all think the same way. Synergy is about that productive friction.
I also like that the sources push back on the idea that more diversity is always better. It says it's context dependent.
Yes, absolutely. For some very specialized tasks, you actually need cognitive similarity. If you're running a quant hedge fund, you need a critical mass of people who are brilliant at statistical modeling. Diluting that for other styles would hurt performance. The optimal mix always depends on the task.
And synergy isn't just about thinking. It's also about complementary skills and even preferences.
That's the broader view. The skills part is obvious. A construction crew needs a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter. Distinct complementary skills. But the preference part is more subtle. You need someone pushing for bold innovation, but you also need someone else focused on prudent risk management.
If everyone's a risk taker, the company blows up.
Exactly. The classic tech startup example is the perfect illustration of this,
The
right?
Jobs and Wozniak partnership.
The perfect example. Wozniak, the engineering genius. The how, Jobs, the vision and business genius. The why and the what's next. That synergy created exponential value and had nothing to do with their demographics.
So we've hired for potential, we've built a team for synergy. The final piece of the puzzle is inclusion. Because if you get the first two right, but mess this up, all that talent just stays locked up.
Inclusion is the key that unlocks everything else. It's the cultural mechanism that turns potential and synergy into actual performance. And at its core, it requires what the psychologist Amy Edmondson calls psychological safety.
The belief that you can speak up without being punished for it.
Yes. Can you admit you made a mistake? Can you challenge your boss's idea in a meeting? If the answer is no, you don't have inclusion.
And that's non-negotiable, isn't it? The research shows that if you have a cognitively diverse team without safety,
You just get conflict, crippling conflict. The research is crystal clear. Cognitive diversity only improves performance when psychological safety is high. Otherwise, people just shut down to protect themselves.
but safety often gets confused with comfort, doesn't it? The sources make a powerful point that true inclusion requires intellectual combat. It requires dissent.
That is such a critical distinction. Safety isn't about being nice. It's about being able to challenge ideas.
Mm.
There was a fantastic study where they had two types of teams. Brainstorm teams were told, no criticism. Debate teams were told to actively criticize and challenge each other.
And the debate teams did better.
They generated significantly more ideas, and the ideas were qualitatively better. True inclusion means creating a space for productive dissent, not just agreement.
And a lack of that kind of inclusion, that ideological homogeneity, creates massive blind spots for a company.
Huge blind spots. The sources highlight how certain corporate functions, like HR or strategy, can become ideological echo chambers.
Yeah.
And that leads to major strategic blunders. We all saw the backlash against Bud Light and Target.
Which cost them billions in market value.
Billions. Because their campaigns were created in a bubble and were totally misaligned with huge parts of their customer base.
There's a measurable cost to that kind of exclusion.
There is. One study found that when executives leave because they feel politically misaligned, it costs their firm an average of $200 million. So yes, including dissenting viewpoints is critical for strategic resilience.
So if we pull all three pillars together, what's the practical advice? It seems to boil down to this idea of removing barriers without lowering standards.
That barrier standard distinction is everything. Inclusion means removing structural barriers. Building wheelchair ramps, offering family-friendly policies, taking bias out of reviews. But it must never mean lowering your performance standards. Lowering the bar doesn't help anyone. It hurts the individual and the organization.
Can you give an example of a company that gets that balance right?
The sources often point to a model like Netflix's radical responsibility. They give employees total flexibility on how and when they work that removes barriers. But they pair it with intense objective accountability for results. That maintains a very high standard.
So you have all the support you need, but you absolutely have to deliver.
That's the combination.
Okay, so if we zoom out and connect all this for you, the listener, the big shift to potential synergy and inclusion isn't some political compromise.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing that the supposed trade-off between fairness and performance is a false one. It's a myth created by bad implementation. When you get good at identifying future talent, building teams for cognitive friction, and creating cultures where it's safe to disagree, you grow the pie for everyone.
That's the real takeaway here. The organizations that keep chasing demographic quotas and box ticking are going to be systematically outcompeted. They'll be beaten by companies that redesign their whole talent system around PSI. The end of this divisive zero-sum DEI fight creates space for something genuinely better.
So, as a final thought for you to take away and maybe explore on your own, if your organization were forced tomorrow to go completely blind to demographics in every hiring and promotion decision, and you could only focus on measurable potential, synergy, and true inclusion, how would your current leadership team change? And would that change make your organization more or less resilient to the next crisis?